Hey everybody, Mark Edward Lewis here with CinemaSound.com. Today we're going to talk about perhaps the most important thing we could possibly talk about, and that's hard drive maintenance, hard drive management, and how do we back up all of our data. And for those of you who are doing multimedia, both picture, 4, 6, 8K, or whatever, even 1080, and audio, large audio files, this is even more important, especially if you're doing big mixes. The quickest way to get a cardiac arrest is to find out that your drives are down and you've lost all your sessions, or worse yet, your client sessions. We have a very specific way we do this at Cinema Sound. There was a 5-part article series on CinemaSound.com as to how we get into depth as to why we do what we do, and I just want to cover the basics of it. All right, here we go. The first thing we need to do first from the department of the redundancy department is figure out how do we get data fast to your computer. Now, there's two basic kinds of data: large giant files and lots of little files. Large giant files basically would be your video, large video files, 192 kilohertz audio files. And, they're giant, and, especially if you've got, uncompressed video or something like this, man, that's a lot of data you got to shove down the pipe. And the best way to do that, unless you're doing an SSD system, which is the best way to do it, but very expensive, is to do it with a RAID, redundant array of independent disks. And we suggest a RAID 0. There's always a number after the RAIDs that delineate what kind of RAID it is, how the drives are organized. And whether you're on a Mac or PC, it's still the fastest way to do it with conventional drives. A RAID 0 means you have 2 or more drives where one data byte is gone to drive A, and then the next one goes to drive B, and then A, and then B, and then A. And you sort of multiply and combine the speed of both drives. It works even better in reverse, where you read from them 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and it starts allowing that for the physical limitations of the drive to kind of be alleviated in the fact that there's another drive there. Now, because that there are physical limitations, having 2 drives does not make your drives twice as fast. Makes it, I don't know the numbers, maybe 85 or 80% as fast. And the more drives you add, the less efficient they become because there's more mechanisms and things like this. But a 4 RAID system is going to be way faster than a 2 drive system, and a way faster yet than a 1 drive system. At Cinema Sound, we've got RAIDs that go out to 48 drives, but they're on a server. And what I'm about to tell you is only applies to those of us that are doing like independent stuff with, maybe a dozen drives or less. If you're doing server farm stuff or whatever, that's a whole different thing, and we're not talking about that. We're just talking about if you got a bunch of drives and you want to drive a lot of data to the computer, and then how do we back it up? So we suggest a RAID 0, as many drives as you can afford, just banging away 4 or 5, maybe even drives. That's the fastest possible way to do things. The next thing you want to do is if you're concerned about data loss, for example, the more drives you get, the more possibility you have of one of those drives going down, right? With 1 drive, the possibility of the drive going down is very small. With 2, you've doubled it. With 3, you've tripled it. With 4, you've quadrupled it. And one of the ways we can solve this in all aspects except for power loss, which can cause a lot of problems, so have your drives on a UPS, is a RAID 5. RAID 5 means that you've got 3 drives or more that allow you to do a RAID 0, but then what they call parity, and it's sort of hard drive voodoo for a copy of all drives on 1 drive, which is kind of nuts, but just go with me on this. So what happens is you have the ability to read from all 3 of these drives, and if one of them goes down, you can pull that drive out, put another one in, and have it copied. And you can even still use the drives even with only two drives. That's 2 drives present. It can be very dangerous because if you lose another one, you lose it all. But it allows you to have a little bit of safety in case something goes wrong with the drive. Maybe one goes dead. And I recommend that with RAID systems that are over 4 drives, just because you've quadrupled 4 drives or more. You've quadrupled the risk of you having one of those drives go down. And in a RAID 0, if any of the drives go down, you are FUBAR. All right, so that is how you're going to drive lots of data, just as many drives as you'd like. And you can use a RAID controller, or you can use Soft RAID, which I really recommend. It's a great program for controlling all the drives. You can use a SATA, USB 3, whatever you want to do, Thunderbolt, whatever. That doesn't matter. But as long as you have a RAID system or more than 1 RAID system getting that data to you, and if you're over 3 drives, 4 drives or more, you're doing a RAID 5 with those, not a RAID 0. The RAID 5, it gives you a little protection. You get a little bit of a speed hit, but it's well worth it when one of those drives goes down. So how do we back all this up? Well, yeah, you can do what's called a RAID 1. RAID 1 means you've got 2 drives, and data goes to this one, and it's duplicated here at the same time. And there's no speed penalty for the read because it's just reading it off of one. And soft RAID even allows you to do a pseudo RAID 0 while you're reading. It'll read off both of your backups. I mean, this one and the backup at the same time, which is super cool if you like that. There is a definite write penalty. So when you're writing to the drive, it has to write to both. So you're getting hit with that. But if you're doing, video editing, that doesn't matter. You only care about reading. If you're doing recording, you definitely don't want to do RAID 1 because, especially if you're recording a band or something like this in studio, it's having to write to both drives at the same time and you can have problems. But the biggest problem with the RAID 1 is that if you corrupt one, it instantly corrupts the other one, which I don't like that at all. I've never liked RAID 1 ever because something happens on one drive, it instantly happens on the other one and you have no way to go back. What I do is, like I said, I run RAID 0s and RAID 5s. And then I have a duplicate set of those drives as well that are not RAID 1. They're just a duplicate. And then I run a program called Carbon Copy Cloner that every hour, on the hour or so, it copies and checks the other set of backup drives to go, are these the same as the main drives? And if not, then it only copies those files. So that if there is a corruption that happens on my main drive, I've got time to disengage the backups or do something to solve it before that backup happens, or even just turn Copy Cloner off. That way there's a point at which there's a little danger because you're like, well, what if your drives went down and you hadn't copied? Well, then I'd lose the data that had within that hour. But I'm much happier doing that than having all my drives and everything corrupted, which can definitely happen. Another place that this can happen is if you have a power failure. And a RAID 0 and especially a RAID 5 are incredibly susceptible to a power failure in the middle of a write action. And it's writing, and then it'll corrupt all drives because the power went out in the middle of a write. And while it was doing it in a RAID 1, it'll corrupt both at the same time, and you're foobar. So you can have a RAID 0, your RAID 5 going super, super fast, nice, whatever, and then every hour or so, whenever you feel comfortable, it's copying it to a duplicate set of drives that are unrelated, and they show up on your desktop as separate backup drives, which is the way I like it. Now, this is how I have my online storage. This is how we have it for files and projects that we're doing for clients and us that are active, or have assets that we need to pull from all the time. But what about backup storage where we're just offloading storage where we know we may need it in the future, but we don't need it now? Well, for there, I buy really, really cheap 7,200 RPM drives that, terabytes or so. And obviously everything's cataloged in an Excel document, so I know where everything is, on what drive, they're labeled and all that other stuff. And make sure you label your power supplies, otherwise you can fry drives if you put the wrong one at the wrong time. So what I do then is I have a double set of external drives. I take the contents of my main drives once I want to clean them off, and I back them up to two sets of external drives. So that means that, Project A, which has been on my RAID 5, the whole thing gets copied to backup, offsite backup 1 and offsite backup 2. And once they're backed up, then I take one and I either put it in offsite storage or on if you don't have offsite storage, some people feel comfortable putting it in their car. Some people put it on one side of the house in the shed, and the other copy goes on the other side of the house. Why? Well, because if your house burns down and you have them on opposite sides of the house or in your car or in external storage, you have a much better chance of those drives, which do not like fire or flooding, to survive. You can put them in the attic, maybe one in the attic on a corner and another one on the other side of the house in the basement or something like that. So you have maximum chances if your house has something happens to your house, you're okay. Best way to do it obviously is in storage somewhere off site. Second best place is in your car. Heat kind of gets to it, but at least you're mobile. And if your house burned down when you were home, you still have all your drives. Although I had a friend get their car broken into and have all those drives gone. But anyway, the point is you have them in two backups, two separate places, and then the files that you're working with online are in a RAID 5, a RAID 0 being backed up every hour or more to separate drive systems. And you're like, man, that's a lot of drives. Well, it is. But how much is your data integrity worth to you? For me and us, it's worth everything. And it's a little cumbersome, but get a program. And Time Machine is not the way you do this. The only thing you use Time Machine for, you Mac users, is to back up your system onto another drive. Don't use Time Machine for anything else, just backing up your system drive. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. Definitely go to cinemasound.com and look at the extensive article that we have, 5 sessions of it, on how to make sure this is all working for you and why it works for us and how it's really, really saved us more than once. And hopefully this has been valuable to you. If so, please subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you at Cinema Sound. Otherwise, we'll see you in the studio.